Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with Polly Mackenzie, director of the Demos think tank, and PR consultant Alex Deane. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages. A censored version of Sue Gray's report into lockdown-breaking parties at Downing Street is due to be published imminently. That's on the front of the Eye, which has apparently left the senior civil servant infuriated. That's according to The Times. The Mail says there is outrage over the, quote, shambles, which has left the government in limbo for months. The Financial Times reports on claims of a stitch-up between the Metropolitan Police and the people who are being investigated. One MP has described the Met as a broken organisation over the handling of the investigation. That's on The Guardian. The Prime Minister is headed for a showdown with his backbenchers, according to The Express, over the hike in national insurance due to concerns about the cost of living crisis. Oil companies BP and Shell are making huge profits, £900 a second, thanks to the rising price of gas. That's the Mirror's exclusive. While the Telegraph finds that energy bills are expected to rise by nearly a half to almost £2,000 from April. Kiss me, quick step. The Sun reports on the latest Strictly Come Dancing romance. And we're joined tonight by, as I was saying, Polly Mackenzie, director of the Demos think tank, and PR consultant Alex Deane. Polly, Alex, thank you so much for joining us. It seems there really is only one story. Let's have a look at the Eye. And Polly, do you want to bring us up to date with where we are with the Sue Gray report?
Well, it's been, a day of twists and turns. There has been discussions about when Sue Gray's report will be published. Will it be censored? Will the Met Police hold it back? What will they hold back? Just incredibly complicated all day. But where we've got to at the end of the day is we are now expecting the Sue Gray report next week, as you're just reporting, that any of the parties which the Metropolitan Police is investigating will only have a minimal reference in, but they will be redacted rather than removed entirely, which means there is some hope that at some point that longer version of Sue Gray's report may be published. The Metropolitan Police has issued a statement saying that they are not investigating any of the serious offences that people were sort of suggesting around covering up evidence or anything that might have gone to a jury trial. They're exclusively looking at possible breaches of the regulations that would be dealt with by a fixed penalty notice. So once they've reviewed Sue Gray's evidence, they are going to be writing to possible perpetrators, asking them if they had a reasonable excuse, and if not, issuing a fine. And then the matter will be closed. So that's basically where we've got to. But the controversy, as the papers are reporting, are about whether the way the Met intervened, really at quite a late stage, to say actually bits of that report need to be removed, feels like it's contributing to kind of cover-ups and delays. Whether that was absolutely the Metropolitan Police's intent or not, that's, I think, how it's coming across in the papers this evening.
Interesting. Alice, what do you make? Let's have a look at the Times, because they're saying that Sue Gray has been left infuriated with what's going on.
Yes, because, of course, she was commissioned to do a report that, as she understood it, would be made public in its entirety. And I think the case for it becoming public wholesale in the end is irresistible. But there are reasons for the Metropolitan Police to ask Sue Gray not to mention things in the course of her report now. And those reasons apply to both sides involved, both the police and those who are being investigated. For the police, it is rare to, never happens, that the police have the entirety of their investigation or their evidence rehearsed in the media before they interview someone or put a case to somebody who is suspected of an offence. So it's not in their interests for that to happen. And on the other hand, what Polly was saying about the procedure is right for these fixed penalty only offences, but misdemeanours. But on the other hand, somebody who gets one of these letters might contest it, might say it wasn't me, or say I'm innocent of that, and that could, in the end, lead to court proceedings. They could appeal the suggestion that they should be the recipient of a fixed penalty notice, and in the end, it could conceivably or feasibly prejudice those proceedings, that their name or their case had been rehearsed in the media before it was even put to them. So for those reasons, I think the Met is actually, it's a very unfashionable view, I know, but I think the Met is right to ask Sue Gray not to publish those details at this point.
What about you, Polly? Do you think it's reasonable?
Well, it's interesting that Alex, who is, of course, a barrister, so you would expect to be completely au fait with all of these matters of law, used the word prejudice. And the Metropolitan Police used the word prejudice in the first statement that they made today. They then briefed that perhaps they shouldn't have used the word prejudice. It's usually a word that's used in relation to jury trials, where, of course, if lots of information has been in the papers about a potential serious crime, that might prejudice a jury's ability to genuinely examine the facts of the case on their merits as presented in court. If, as Alex is right, that these fixed penalty notices could be contested, they would go to a magistrate's court. They are summary offences. And so therefore that question of being prejudiced in front of a jury simply doesn't amount here. People did think at the beginning of the day that it might, because perhaps Sue Gray had uncovered evidence that, for example, evidence had been deleted, that phones had been wiped, that emails had been deleted in order to cover up relatively minor crimes. You may remember Chris Huhne, who was a Liberal Democrat cabinet minister, was caught speeding. And instead of just fessing up and losing his licence, it was then discovered that he'd got his wife to take those penalty points. That was then a very serious crime, which did go to a court and led him to be sent to prison, and his wife as well. So, it was possible, it seemed at the beginning of the day, that something like that might be transpiring, where the cover-up was much worse than the potential offence. But the Metropolitan Police cleared that up. And they said that, no, they are only looking at these breaches of the regulations, which could go at worst to a fixed penalty notice, and then if that's challenged, to a magistrate's court. So I think it's kind of overkill from the Met. And I think they also just, classic Met, unfortunately, just haven't thought about the court of public opinion and the absolute essentialness in a democracy, a liberal democracy like ours, that the police are seen to be independent of the executive, that they are not just in hoc to ministers, and that they are able to hold even the highest office holders in the land to account if they break the law.
Interesting. Alex, what do you think about that term overkill? Do you think it is overkill?
It might be. You have to forgive me, Kimberly. I had a little trouble hearing some of what Polly said, but I think I got the gist of it. I think that given that these were fixed penalty notice offences from 2 years ago, some people on the one hand would regard it as overkill to investigate it at all. But plainly that wasn't going to wash because so many people were calling for it. It does amuse me now that some of the government's most fervent critics who demanded that the government was investigated by the police time and time again now say, because the Metropolitan Police's investigation, which they called for, might not suit the timetable that they want because of Sue Gray's report, they say it's terrible, and they're furious with the Metropolitan Police for doing exactly what they called for. So whether it's overkill or not is not really down to me. They'll have to decide whether that's right. But yes, is it right to investigate like this for something that's a fixed penalty notice from 2 years ago? I would probably point to what Polly was saying about justice being seen to be done and nobody being seen to be above the law. It is different if an offence is alleged to have happened in 10 Downing Street to if it happened just to the man in the street or committed by the man in the street. It's very important that those who make our laws or are involved in the making of our laws are seen to be above reproach.
OK. Just very briefly, Polly, and we'll come back to this after the break because we do need to go to a break. But just quickly, the FT weekend, who is accusing the Met of this stitch-up that you mentioned?
Well, lots of people, including quoted here Sir Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, who he measures his words a little. He said if a perception of a stitch-up between the Met leadership and Number 10 will damage our politics for generations. And I think, there's absolutely no evidence that there has been a stitch-up or a conspiracy. But I think that the Metropolitan Police, Cressida Dick gave a good statement, actually, to the London Assembly earlier in the week, where she talked about the importance of tackling these offences if they were, the most egregious offences and there was little chance of a defence, is that question of how do you deal with this is incredibly difficult. It's incredibly difficult, of course, to prosecute or take on the Prime Minister of the land over the breach of law in his own home. That's always going to be a challenge to the institutions of the state. And it doesn't at the moment feel like those institutions have really lived up to that challenge in ensuring that all of the public can have confidence that justice will be done.
OK, Alex, I see you shaking your head. We're going to go to a break. Polly and Alex, we'll be back in a moment. Thanks. Coming up, energy bills are set to rise by nearly half under new plans. Here's a story in The Telegraph. Hello again. You're watching the press preview. With me now, Polly Mackenzie, the director of the Demos think tank, and PR consultant Alex Deane. Thanks again for joining us. Let's talk about energy and bring up the front of the Daily Telegraph. Alex, this is terrifying that you could have to pay £1,900 from April for your energy bills.
And of course, the number is a projection and speculation, but nobody is in doubt that bills will go up a lot if nothing changes in the current course of circumstances with energy providers. And it is, of course, not helped by what is happening between Russia and Ukraine either. Not that we are massively dependent on that region for our energy per se, but because there is a knock-on effect in energy markets and there's only so much to go around. It is, I would say, part of the point that is behind those who argue the UK should become more energy sufficient, because it will insulate you, no pun intended, from the shocks of events like that and from the vicissitudes of being reliant on foreign energy. There is no better example or time to argue for the UK having more power supply of our own than what we're seeing on our front pages today.
It's absolutely terrifying. And let's have a look at the front of the Mirror. And Polly, tell us what you think. Energy firms they're earning £900 a second. This is BP and Shell, according to the Mirror.
Yeah, because there's two parts to most of the energy companies. They're integrated, vertically integrated. So they are doing the kind of wholesale supply and the retailing. And on the wholesale side, gas prices are so high that they are making a lot of money. And whilst Alex is right that this figure, this estimate is only an estimate, it's based on basically an average of wholesale prices over 6 months up until today. And so we now kind of have all of the numbers to plug into the algorithm. It may be out by a few pounds, but it's basically, this is what it's going to be. And it's not actually a cap on people's bills either. It's a cap on the amount you can pay per unit, then averaged out to a normal house. So if you are like the energy user you had on your show just very recently, who has high costs because of equipment or because you're at home all day if you're disabled, your energy bills could be much higher than this. There is no question that the government has to intervene. In the short term, that has to be simply getting cash to people to help pay their energy bills if they're on low income or have high costs. And in the longer term, it's a combination of what Alex talked about, plus insulating our homes and energy efficiency. We don't have the highest energy prices in Europe, but we basically have the highest energy bills. And that's because our homes are just so rubbish.
OK. Polly and Alex, we'll leave it there for this hour. Thank you so much.